When we first pulled up to 3860 Carolina Street, I remember thinking how quiet the neighborhood looked. It wasn't much, a small rental house tucked on an ordinary street in Gary, Indiana. But after everything we'd been through, it felt like a chance to start over. It was November 2011, cold already, and I was tired. Tired of moving, tired of uncertainty. My mother, Rosa, and my 3 kids, 7, 9, and 12, deserved peace. I thought we'd found it. The house was modest. A screened-in porch out front, 2 stories, a basement, and just enough space for the 5 of us to settle in. We unpacked with hope. My youngest was giggling about how he wanted the room with the most sunlight. My oldest daughter started writing in her new journal. Rosa even smiled when she saw the small backyard. For a moment, things felt normal. Whole, even. But it didn't last. Just a few days in, I walked onto the porch and froze. It was covered, absolutely covered, with big black flies. They buzzed along the screen, crawled over each other on the glass, some already dead in piles at the corners. I remember thinking, how? It was freezing outside. December in Indiana. These weren't houseflies. They were the kind you'd expect in the thick of summer, not winter. Not like this. Rosa and I grabbed fly swatters and bug spray. We fought them off, thinking maybe we'd left a window cracked, maybe something had died beneath the porch. But they kept coming back. No matter what we did, no matter how many we killed, they were back the next day, just as thick. I couldn't explain it. Then came the sounds. Late at night, when the kids were tucked in and the house was dark, I would hear the floor creak. Not just the old house kind of creak, either. Footsteps, starting in the basement. Slow. One step, another. Creaking up toward the kitchen. I'd freeze in my bed, straining my ears, convinced someone had broken in. I'd check. Nothing. Doors still locked. Lights off. Empty. Rosa heard them too. One night, she came into my room with her face pale and eyes wide. "Did you hear it again?" she whispered. I nodded. We didn't know what to say. We just sat there in silence, trying to explain it away in our heads. Then she saw it. It was around midnight. The kids were asleep, and Rosa had gone to get a glass of water. She told me later that when she walked into the living room, she stopped dead in her tracks. A shadow, tall, too tall, was pacing, not floating, walking, back and forth, slow and deliberate. She couldn't see its face, just the shape. A heavy blackness that seemed to suck in the light around it. When she called out, it vanished. She screamed. I ran in and found her clutching her chest. "It was in here," she kept saying. "It was right here." And then we noticed the boot prints. Wet, muddy prints tracking across the hardwood floor. But no one had come inside. The doors hadn't opened. We'd all been upstairs. That night, none of us slept. We dragged blankets into the living room and turned every light on. I stayed up, praying, telling myself this was stress, a bad dream, anything. But deep down, I already knew. We'd only just moved in. And already, something didn't want us there. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, that the flies had some logical explanation, that the cold air slipping in through the porch door made the floor creak. But it was getting harder to lie to myself, because each day it felt like the house was waking up more, watching more, breathing. It was Rosa who found the boot prints. She called me into the living room one morning after getting up before the rest of us. Her voice was shaking. There, across the hardwood floor, were muddy, wet boot prints, big ones. Too big for any of us. They started by the wall and stretched across the room like someone had just walked through a storm and into our home. But none of the doors were open. No one had come in. There wasn't even a trace of mud outside. And worse, the prints didn't lead out. They just stopped in the middle of the room. Rosa wiped them up without saying a word. I think she hoped cleaning them would erase them from memory. But by that point, we both knew this was more than a coincidence. Not long after that, she was attacked. I was in the kitchen when I heard her choking. Sharp, short gasps, followed by a crash. I ran into the hallway and found her on the floor, clawing at her throat, eyes wide with terror. There were no hands around her neck, but something was choking her. I grabbed her shoulders and screamed her name, and just like that, it stopped. She sat there sobbing, trying to catch her breath, while I called out to God, shaking. That night, we all slept in the same room. Every one of us. My kids pulled their mattresses into mine. Rosa refused to be alone. We locked every door, closed every curtain, and turned every light on. But even then, the shadows lingered. Then came the nightmares. My daughter, 12 years old and always the quiet one, started waking up crying, saying she saw things in her dreams. A woman with burning eyes, standing at the foot of her bed. A man in the corner whispering in a voice that sounded like wind through broken glass. I tried to comfort her, told her it was just her imagination. But my heart was pounding too, because she wasn't the only one dreaming dark things. Then came the sleepover. She had invited 2 friends to stay the night, trying to feel normal again. I let them stay upstairs, thinking maybe, just maybe, this thing, whatever it was, would leave her alone. But sometime around 2 a.m., I heard screaming. Not just the playful kind, screaming, real raw terror. I raced up the stairs, Rosa close behind me, and what I saw made my blood run cold. My daughter was in the air, levitating above the bed, limp, eyes closed, her arms at her sides, her body perfectly still, hovering 3 feet in the air. Her friends were frozen, pressed into the corners of the room, one of them sobbing uncontrollably. Rosa dropped to her knees and started praying, loud, fast, panicked. And just like that, my daughter dropped, as if someone had let go of her. She hit the mattress hard, bounced, and then sat up, dazed. No memory, no clue what had happened. After that, I stopped caring what anyone thought. I started documenting everything. Every strange mark on the wall, every word my kids muttered in their sleep, every door that opened on its own. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, descriptions. I needed proof. Because deep down, I knew no one would believe us. I barely believed it myself. We slept in shifts. Took turns staying up at night with a Bible on the table and holy oil by the door. I prayed harder than I ever had before. But the feeling inside the house never left. If anything, it was growing stronger. We hadn't even been there a full month, and already we were at war with something we couldn't see. Something that moved without feet. Something that touched without hands. Something that watched us sleep and waited for us to break. By January, something in the house had changed. It was no longer just noises or shadows or things moving. Now it was inside my children. It started with my youngest son. He was 7, sweet and shy, always clinging to my side. But one evening, I found him sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at the wall. Not blinking, not moving, just still. I called his name. He didn't answer. I knelt beside him, and that's when I saw his eyes, rolled back into his head, nothing but white showing. His lips started to move, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was deep, too deep, like gravel dragging through water. "It's time to die," he growled. My whole body went cold. I thought maybe he was joking, acting. But his face wasn't his own. He smiled at me, slow and twisted, then hissed, "I will kill you." Then he snapped out of it, blinked, and looked around like he'd just woken up from a nap. No memory, no fear. That was the first time I cried in front of my kids since we moved in. I called my mom and told her what happened, and while I was on the phone, my older son, 9 years old, was suddenly yanked off the couch. Not slipped, not tripped, thrown, across the living room. His body slammed into the wall and dropped. He started screaming that the monster was pulling his legs, but there was nothing there. I checked his body, no bruises, no cuts, nothing broken, just fear, pure, bone-deep terror. That night, we didn't just sleep in the same room. We stayed awake, all of us. I sat in the corner with my Bible, rocking back and forth, trying to pray louder than the creaks and whispers around us. I didn't know where else to turn, so I made an appointment with a physician. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was something medical going on. Maybe we were tired. Maybe it was mold in the house. Anything. Something that could be treated, explained, fixed. But the doctor didn't have answers. He barely lasted 30 minutes in the house. The boys sat across from him in the living room while I explained their episodes. As I spoke, my younger son started humming, low and slow. Then he began to grin, rocking back and forth, whispering something I couldn't understand. The doctor asked him a question, but he didn't answer. Then he turned and looked at the man with those dead white eyes and said, "You can't help them." The doctor stood up so fast he knocked over his clipboard. He told me, gently but firmly, that he believed we were under psychological stress. He called us delusional, said the boys might be mimicking behavior they were exposed to, that it was more likely emotional suggestion than anything real. But then he left the house and called the Department of Child Services. That was the day I started to feel completely alone. My mother tried to stay strong, but I could tell she was breaking too. People thought we were making it up, that I was feeding my kids stories, coaching them. But how could I make a child levitate? How could I make my son walk into a trance and speak in a voice that wasn't his? I started questioning myself. Was I cursed? Was this my fault? What if something had attached to me, and now it was living through my children? The house didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a trap, a maze I couldn't escape from, even when the front door was wide open. And at the heart of it, behind the walls, inside the floorboards, something waited, watching, feeding off us, especially my boys. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person. Every breath my children took in their sleep, I second-guessed. Were they dreaming? Were they really asleep? Were they still themselves? Something evil was in that house, and I was starting to believe it wasn't just in the house anymore. It was in one of my children. By the time April came, the weight of that house was crushing us. Every day was worse than the one before. The boys weren't just having outbursts anymore. They were slipping into something else entirely. I didn't recognize their faces sometimes. They would blink and look at me like I was a stranger, then start speaking in voices that didn't sound human. And just as quickly as it came, it would vanish, and they'd act like nothing had happened. I knew we couldn't go on like this. I had to find someone, anyone, who would help us. That's when the Department of Child Services got involved. After the physician's report, they came knocking. They thought I was coaching my kids, that maybe I was unstable. They suspected neglect, maybe abuse, maybe something darker, but not the kind of dark I was trying to tell them about. Still, I agreed to the evaluation. What choice did I have? Maybe if someone outside saw it with their own eyes, they'd believe us. Maybe then someone would help. We were taken to a hospital for a psychological and physical evaluation. I remember sitting in the waiting room, hands trembling, whispering prayers under my breath. My boys were calm, too calm, like they were waiting for something. Then the moment came, and no one was ready. A DCS caseworker, a nurse, and several hospital staff were in the room with my younger son. I was just outside the door. It started quietly. He mumbled something under his breath. The caseworker leaned in, asked him what he said. He didn't answer. Then, slowly, he got up and backed into the corner. His eyes rolled back, and then he moved. He didn't run. He didn't jump. He glided backward up the wall, both feet flat against the paint. His body bent backward at the ceiling. Then, without using his hands or any support, he flipped over the caseworker's head, and landed flat on his feet. For a second, no one moved. Then chaos. The nurse screamed. One of the hospital staff ran out. The caseworker stumbled backward, her clipboard crashing to the floor. I rushed into the room and grabbed my son, but his body was limp. He blinked slowly, confused, like waking from a dream. When I asked him what happened, he just looked at me and said, "Did I do something?" The nurse later said, "He walked up the wall, flipped over and stood there. There's no way he could have done that." And she was right. There was no physical way, no trick, no wires, no illusion. Just the impossible. After that, everything changed. Word spread like fire. Doctors, nurses, DCS staff. Everyone started whispering. Some stayed silent, afraid of looking crazy. Others couldn't stop talking about what they'd seen. And those who had laughed at us before, the skeptics, started stepping back. Something had shattered their version of reality. Something they couldn't unsee. One of the caseworkers told me later, "I don't know what's in that house, but it followed you here. And I think it's real." For the first time, I didn't feel alone. It wasn't just us anymore. They saw it. They heard it. They felt it. The horror that had been hiding in our walls, slipping through our children's voices, creeping through our rooms at night. It had finally stepped out into the light, and it shook everyone to the core. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew the truth had finally cracked through the disbelief, and the nightmare was far from over. After the hospital incident, word traveled fast, and when doctors and caseworkers, people of science, started whispering that something unnatural had taken place, the police stepped in. I welcomed it. Part of me hoped they would bring logic, that maybe they'd find a gas leak or hidden speakers or anything that could explain the evil we were living with. But the deeper they went, the more they realized this wasn't about logic. This was about fear. The officers came with clipboards and questions. They toured the house with caution, snapping photos, recording audio. One detective stood in our basement with a recorder in hand, asking questions like it was a routine investigation. But that night, when they played the tape back, there was a voice that hadn't been in the room. A breathy whisper, low and unnatural, murmuring just one word. "Hey." That's all. Just that one syllable. But it didn't belong to anyone present, and it chilled them to the bone. The officer said, "I heard it clear as day." But no one had spoken. They returned again the next day, bringing more equipment. Cameras, thermal sensors, voice recorders. One of them, a tall man with arms crossed tight over his chest, clearly didn't believe us. I didn't blame him. Until that moment, I hadn't believed half the things I'd seen either. Then their gear started malfunctioning. Recorders cut out mid-sentence. Cameras froze. Batteries died, even though they'd just been charged. One officer's device refused to turn back on at all, and when he removed the battery, it was scorching hot to the touch. I saw the look in their eyes shift, from skeptical to shaken. Something in that house didn't want to be recorded, and it made that clear. Then came the photo. They'd left a camera in our living room, set on a timer to snap images periodically when no one was there. Later that night, they reviewed the film, and that's when they saw it. A faint, cloudy silhouette standing in the middle of the room. Not dust, not light, a full figure, slightly hunched, thick in the shoulders, with a head that seemed tilted at an impossible angle. They zoomed in, tried adjusting the contrast, but the shape stayed. And the strangest thing? It was facing the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. When the officers came back, they were different, less confident. One of them, the same one who'd brushed off the first visit, refused to enter the basement again. Said his chest tightened every time he stepped near the stairs. Another admitted that ever since leaving our house, his patrol car had been acting up, stalling without reason, lights flickering, the radio playing static in bursts even when it was off. Then the captain showed up. He'd heard about the case, the recordings, the photograph, the rumors, and he came not to believe, but to prove we were wrong. I remember watching him walk through our living room, arms behind his back, expression blank. But after a few minutes in that house, something changed. He later told a colleague, "I don't know what's in there, but I am a believer now." I overheard that, and I'll never forget those words. It meant something when it came from them, from people who were trained not to believe in anything but facts. They had walked into our nightmare and seen a glimpse of the thing we'd been trying to escape. They had tasted the fear, and they didn't want to come back. Even the law started to fear this place, and I was still living in it, with my children, with whatever it was. There were nights after that where I wouldn't even blink. I'd sit in a chair by the door, Bible in hand, watching the shadows, listening to the walls breathe. The officers had gone, the doctors had spoken, the photos had been printed, the tapes played. But none of it had stopped the thing inside the house. It had only proved one thing. We weren't crazy. We were haunted. By the time Reverend Michael Maginot came into our lives, we were out of options. Doctors couldn't help us. The police couldn't stop it. DCS had seen it but couldn't explain it. We were stuck in a war no one was equipped to fight. And the enemy, whatever it was, wasn't going anywhere. If anything, it had burrowed in deeper. The Reverend arrived not with fear, but with caution. He didn't mock us, didn't rush to conclusions. He listened, sat with us for hours, asked thoughtful questions, took notes, prayed. And then, God help him, he volunteered to stay the night. I warned him. I told him what the house did to people, how it changed them, how it waited until you let your guard down and then showed you what it really was. But he said he needed to feel it for himself. He said truth wasn't always seen in daylight. That night we gave him the living room. We all stayed in the same room, quietly watching, the air thick with dread. The knocking started around 2 a.m. It came from the basement, slow, steady. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. The Reverend stood, calm, and walked to the top of the stairs. The knocking stopped, but then we heard something else. A low growl. Not like an animal. It didn't come from a throat. It came from the walls, from the air, vibrating like thunder just beneath the skin. Cold rushed through the room like a sudden blizzard. The candle went out. My children screamed. My mother clutched her chest. I dropped to my knees and cried out, "Lord, don't let it take us." And then something happened. Something I'll never forget. I felt it. A sudden weight lift off my body, like something had been sitting on my shoulders for months, years maybe, and finally stood up. I gasped, grabbing my chest. And in that moment, I heard it. Not with my ears, but inside. A scream. High-pitched, furious, and fading, like it was being dragged away. The air turned still, the walls went quiet, the cold vanished. I looked around. My children, calm. Rosa, tears in her eyes but smiling. The Reverend, sweating, pale, but standing firm. He stayed for the rest of the night, and nothing else happened. In the days that followed, things began to change. The boys stopped speaking in strange voices. The trance-like states vanished. The dreams, the levitations, the footsteps, gone. For the first time in months, the house felt ordinary, quiet. It didn't last forever. There were small things, creaks, chills, nightmares, but never like before. Never that heavy, suffocating evil that had taken over our lives. The Department of Child Services eventually closed our case. They noted that the children were no longer exhibiting disturbing behaviors, that we were no longer fixated on demonic explanations. But they didn't understand. We hadn't been fixated. We'd been attacked. Reverend Maginot later confirmed that he believed the house needed a full exorcism. I swear to you, I felt it leave me. And I swear to you, I heard it scream. We left in the summer of 2012. No farewell, no packing party, no sense of closure, just quiet. We walked away from 3860 Carolina Street with what we could carry and never looked back. The house didn't fight to keep us. It didn't roar or slam doors or throw furniture like in the movies. It just watched, as if it knew we were done, as if it had already taken what it wanted. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that final door click, that little metallic snick as I locked the house one last time. I stood on the porch where those flies had swarmed just 7 months earlier. The screen was still bent. The air felt still, too still, like the house was holding its breath. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't pray. I just walked. We moved into a new place, smaller, quieter, further from town, and almost overnight, the fear disappeared. My boys stopped whispering to things that weren't there. My daughter stopped waking up screaming. My mother slept through the night again. We were finally breathing, not just with our lungs, but with our souls. People told me it was psychological, that we'd let go of the narrative, as if all those things, The voices, the levitations, the wall walking, the choking hands had only existed in our minds, but we knew better. And the people who witnessed it knew better too. The doctors who fled, the police who swore never to return, the priest who stood in that living room and felt something ancient and hateful press against his skin. We never spoke to the landlord again. I don't know if anyone moved in after us, but the neighborhood talked. Stories started spreading about the demon house on Carolina Street, about the family who escaped. Whispers traveled fast. Some people laughed. Others crossed the street rather than walk past it, but no one stayed long. Then, in 2014, the media found us. The Indianapolis Star ran a piece on our haunting, and suddenly, the world wanted to know what happened inside that little house. They called it the portal to hell. We didn't ask for the attention. We didn't want it. But there it was. Our nightmare, splashed across headlines, dissected on television, debated by strangers. And then Zach Bagans showed up. A paranormal investigator. He'd heard the stories. He wanted to see for himself. He bought the house, filmed a documentary. He brought in equipment, priests, psychics, everything we never had the resources for. He called it the most terrifying case he'd ever encountered. And when filming wrapped, he did something no one expected. He tore the house down. No press conference, no ceremony, just demolition. As if wiping it from the earth could erase what happened there. When asked why, all he said was, something was inside that house. Something very dark. I believe him, because I lived it. Sometimes I think about that house, about what it wanted. It didn't want fame. It didn't want money. It wanted us broken. It wanted fear, confusion, despair. It fed on our prayers and twisted them. It played with our hope like a toy. And when it realized it couldn't have us anymore, it let us go. Quietly, coldly, like we were never even there. But I still hear it sometimes, in my dreams, in the silence before sleep. That low voice, that cold breath. That house didn't want to haunt us. It wanted to destroy us.